The Michelle Troconis verdict is in. She is guilty on all of the counts that she was charged with, and we're going to break down exactly why I feel, as an attorney, at least looking at it from a trial attorney's perspective, why the verdict came back as guilty and whether it's the right verdict. Is it the right verdict or is it not the right verdict? If you look at all the evidence, looking at it through the lens of reasonable doubt, did the jury actually get this right? And before I jump into the actual evidence, let me just give you a quick recap of what happened since the verdict. There was a press conference that, well, I guess you can, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't call it a press conference, but the defense attorney for Michelle Troconis did speak to the press, and he obviously spoke about his displeasure with the verdict. He doesn't understand why the jury came back with this verdict because of all his arguments that he made to the jury, why they should not come back with a guilty verdict. He said he's going to file something called a motion for judgment notwithstanding the verdict. What is that? That is a also pretty common motion that is filed that basically is just asking the judge that even though the verdict came back a certain way that's against you, but your motion is that the evidence is so strongly against that verdict that you're still entitled to judgment notwithstanding their verdict. And this is a time where you can present, again, all of your arguments to the judge, all the evidence which shows that the jury just completely got it wrong, and therefore you should be entitled to a judgment notwithstanding the verdict. 99.9% of the times, these motions are denied, and that is most likely going to happen in this case as well. But you just, you got to check off all the boxes. It's another motion to file, another thing to bill for. So perhaps, it's just dotting all your T's and dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's before you actually file the appeal. So he will file the motion notwithstanding the verdict. It's going to be denied, and then he's going to file an appeal. So now the question is going to be, well, are there any appealable issues that were that he preserved? And the answer to this is that something that I mentioned in some of my other videos, and if you've been watching my videos on the Michelle Troconis trial from the beginning, my opinion is that both of these attorneys, all of these attorneys, were very experienced. I thought that they did a great job. The prosecutors did a great job. The defense attorney, some people didn't like his style. Some people didn't like his tone or his tactics, but just the substantive parts of what he was doing, I thought were very good. He was very knowledgeable in the law, very preserved the record. If you want to know as an attorney how to try a case where you may lose and how to preserve the record, watch this attorney, watch everything that he did. He really was a clinic for preserving the record, making strong arguments for your client. He was a great advocate for his client. I think that every dollar that they spent, he deserved and earned. He really put up a strong fight for Michelle, and he filed all the appropriate motions, made all the right oral arguments, and he preserved the record. And therefore, there is certainly going to be different parts of the trial that he's going to be able to appeal. Now, if the appeal is going to go anywhere is another question. But for example, let me just give you one point which he made a motion about, which he was actually, according to my research of the law, he was right about and the judge was wrong about. But if it's actually going to make a difference is another question. So this was one of the motions that he made, was that they allowed in certain hearsay comments that were in furtherance of the conspiracy. Now, generally speaking, hearsay is not admissible. There are, of course, always exceptions, and that's what attorneys get paid to argue about. So what are the exceptions? One of the exceptions for the hearsay rule is a comment, a statement made in the furtherance of a conspiracy. Those statements are allowed in. And the question is that at what point of the trial is the judge allowed to allow those statements in? Meaning, let's say the prosecutor just charges somebody with conspiracy to commit murder. So does that mean that all of the conversations that he's had with any of his friends should be admitted because maybe it's in the furtherance of a conspiracy, right? That doesn't make any sense. So what the attorney showed, the attorney for Michelle Troconis, what he showed was that there's a specific case law in Connecticut that says that the judge has to make a finding by the preponderance of the evidence, which means more likely than not. So the judge has to make a finding that based on the evidence that already came in the trial, there is the likelihood of a conspiracy. And now that there is the likelihood of a conspiracy, now we can start allowing in some of those statements. So this was the argument that the defense attorney made, that at that point of the trial, there was no finding by the judge, by the preponderance of the evidence, that there's been a conspiracy, and therefore those statements should not come in. Now, the judge didn't agree with it, and the judge allowed those statements in. And now the question is going to be, okay, now that he allowed those statements in, is that really harmless error? Is it going to really make a difference in the ultimate verdict of the trial? And that's going to be a question for the Court of Appeals. But that's just one example of an objection that the defense attorney made that preserved the record, which he will certainly make an argument about in the Court of Appeals in his appeal on this case. So that's what we have to look forward to. Now, something that I always talk about, let's move on to the actual evidence and some of the arguments. Something that I talk about all the time in my videos is that when you're talking to the jury, and especially when you have a little bit of a more complicated charge. So a conspiracy is always going to be filled with circumstantial evidence, and there's going to be a lot of moving pieces. So what's important as an attorney, especially when you're the defense attorney, is to explain the elements of the crime, explain the jury instructions clearly to the jury so they understand exactly what they have to find. And the prosecutor admitted that a lot of the evidence here is circumstantial, and it's always going to be that way in a conspiracy. You're not going to find very often in a conspiracy where they're going to have a recording of two people getting together and saying, let's commit this murder. A lot of the time, those conversations are not recorded, or they're kept very quiet, and therefore you're left with a lot of circumstantial evidence. You know, people that are in the same area at the same time, they're doing interesting things together. You know, there's going to always be a lot of circumstantial evidence. So that's always going to be the point. So something that as an attorney, what you can argue, first of all, is the jury instructions. That the jury has to find very specific elements. Now, he did talk about this a little bit, but I don't think it was stressed enough. And you have to go through that jury instruction and explain to the jury, in order to find my client guilty, you have to find the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt. One of them is that that Michelle Troconis intended for this murder to happen, number one. Number two, that there was an agreement, not just knowledge, not just presence, not that she just happened to have been in the room at that time, or happened to have been with Fotis, or happened to have known about it. She had to have agreed about it. They've had to have an agreement about this. If this was stressed, that you have to find that before you do anything, you've got to find that there was an agreement. You've got to find that she intended for Jennifer to be killed. Explain that a little bit more. I think it would have gone perhaps a little bit further with this jury. That's number one. Another thing that I like to always talk about is that there are certain concessions that you have to make. I always talk about this. You got to make certain concessions. If you try to fight everything, then you're going to lose a lot of credibility with the jury. And if you're giving the jury an option between, look, either everything's speculation or she's guilty, right? Now, they're not going to say, well, everything's speculation. They're going to say, well, there's some pretty strong evidence, or some circumstantial evidence that Michelle was involved. So I'm not just, if you're giving me the option, either if you find that she's guilty, then it's all speculation, or it's all good evidence. So it's an easier decision for the jury to say, well, look, this is not all speculation. So if you just argue so strongly that it's all speculation, then it's hard for the jury to come back and say, yes, you're right, this is all one big hoax, this is all one big speculation, and there's no evidence at all. So what you should do, I think, when you're making certain concessions, number one, a concession that the defense attorney should have made in this case, I think, a little bit more clearly, was Fotis absolutely committed this murder. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. We're not going to argue about that. You know, and all the arguments that he was making during trial about that, I don't think it was helpful. Because when the jury says, come on, Fotis is depositing all these garbage bags all over the place. They got his DNA all over the place. They got Jennifer's bloody shirt and bloody bra and gloves and sponges and all this, and zip ties and all this stuff that's all happened to have been with Fotis. And what? He didn't commit the murder? It was some accomplice of his, or some accessory, you know, like what? That's not going to help. So just concede that point. Say, you know what? Fotis committed this murder. Okay, that's number one. Number two, another concession to make is, don't say it's all speculation. Say, yes, you're right. The prosecutor's right. There is a lot of circumstantial evidence here. But the fact that it's circumstantial evidence doesn't automatically get you to beyond a reasonable doubt. And especially it doesn't get you to beyond a reasonable doubt for all the specific charges. Remember, there's 6 different charges here. I believe there's 6 different charges here, right? So there's conspiracy to commit murder, and then there's some other charges. There's tampering with evidence. You may find as a jury that there's enough circumstantial evidence to convict Michelle Troconis for tampering with evidence, or accessory to tampering evidence, or conspiracy to tamper with evidence, but still not enough circumstantial evidence to find her guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. And as the defense attorney, you know that that's the most important charge to beat. If you would ask the defense attorney before the jury goes to deliberate, would you rather them come back with guilty on all charges, innocent on all charges, and that's your only 2 options, or guilty on the tampering with the evidence charges, but still innocent or not guilty on the conspiracy to commit murder? Of course, any defense attorney would say much rather take a guilty on the other charges. So you want to leave that option open to the jury. If you just fight everything and say everything's speculation and none of this is Michelle's fault and she didn't know about anything at all, it's much harder for the jury to swallow. If that's the 2 options, either guilty on everything or innocent on everything, then it's more likely that they're going to come back with a guilty on everything type of verdict. So I think that that's an important thing. Don't call it all speculation. You can say certain parts are speculation, but certain parts that are pretty strong circumstantial evidence, concede on that, and then just say you can still make an argument that there's a reasonable doubt as to what that circumstantial evidence tells you. So let me give you a theory. Let me give you an argument that perhaps could have been made to the jury, and I think that this takes care a lot of a lot of the evidence that was presented in this case, and it will still not get you to conspiracy to commit murder. Now, wait till the end, because I think that there is still 2 very strong pieces of evidence which point to Michelle Troconis' guilt in the conspiracy to commit murder. But I think that this takes care a lot of a lot of the evidence that the prosecution presented and a lot of the arguments that they made. So let me give you a theory. Let me ask you, what happens if what really happened in this case was that Fotis did not tell Michelle that he was going to kill Jennifer? Let's say there was no conspiracy here. Let's say Fotis did this all on his own. But after he did that, he called Michelle and he says, Michelle, look, Jennifer was just been our thorn in our side, has been ruining our relationship for 2 years of as you described, it was 2 years of murder, and you were about to leave me, and it's really ruining our relationship. And I had to take measures into my own hands, and I just killed Jennifer. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I did it. Okay. And now, Michelle, we can have the rest of our lives together. They are obviously in love. Michelle knew Fotis as this person who was just devoted and a kind person. And the point that the defense attorney made that Fotis was a very good manipulator. Everybody thought that he was a wonderful guy. Even Lauren Almeida thought that she considered him a mentor at some points. So he had a very positive influence on people, and people thought that he was a decent guy. Nobody even thought that he was able to do this type of thing, to commit this type of murder. So even Lauren Almeida was fooled. So you can very easily say that Michelle was also fooled. This is also a guy who's very good at hiding things. And the defense attorney made a good point about that. He's very good at hiding things. So if he were to call Michelle afterwards and say, look, I did this, maybe I shouldn't have done it, but now we're going to have the rest of our lives together, and we're going to just ride off to the sunset. Now Jennifer's out of our lives. I'm going to have my kids back. All this divorce stress and pressure is going to be out the window. We're just going to have the rest of our lives together. And all I need you to do is help me to dispose of the evidence. How much of the evidence, okay, if that was what really happened, and I think that could be a reasonable doubt. That can be a reasonable theory for what happened, and that's something you can argue to the jury. Maybe this is what happened. Maybe this is what happened, that Fotis did it without Michelle knowing, and now he's just asking Michelle to help him with the cleanup. And Michelle, for whatever reason, she fell for it. And she says, I love this guy. We have so much together. We connect so well. I don't know why he did this murder, but it's understandable. Someone in a relationship like that can feel that Fotis would never do this to me, and it's just Jennifer because it's driving him crazy, but I'm going to help him out. And maybe she said, okay, I'm going to help you out to dispose of the evidence. So therefore, you're right. The tampering of the evidence and all the fires and the Toyota Tacoma and the cleanup at 80 Mountain Spring and all of that evidence and taking the keys from the Toyota Tacoma and all of that evidence points to the fact, you're right, Michelle was involved in the cleanup. You're right. And this can be a theory given to the jury. So jury, maybe you can make an argument the following. We don't believe that Michelle was involved at all. I don't believe Michelle was involved at all. But you as the jury, you may feel that Michelle was involved. How can it be that she was just a coincidence, as the prosecutor said in his rebuttal? Oh, is it just a coincidence? All of these things are just a coincidence and she never knew anything. You know what? Maybe jury, maybe ladies and gentlemen, maybe you agree with the prosecutor that it's just impossible that Michelle didn't know anything. But then the question is, what did she know and when did she know it? So if Fotis told her after he committed this murder on his own, and he enlisted Michelle to help him clean up this murder and tamper with the evidence, you're right, and conspiracy to tamper with the evidence and all those other charges, great. Maybe that's what she was involved with. But what actually points to the fact that she was involved with the conspiracy to commit the murder? So this could be a theory. This could have been an argument that the defense attorney made to the jury, but it wasn't made because you fought everything. If you concede on this, you could say, again, you can say, we don't believe she was involved in anything. But if you do believe the prosecutor, you do think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, well, maybe she was just involved in the cover-up. And if that's the case, all those stops that they made, Starbucks and the lies in the interview that he was in the shower, he wasn't in the shower, that all came after. That was after Fotis told her what happened and said, I need you to help me with my alibi. Let's make some stuff up together and say that you saw me at home, say that you were in the shower with me, and say all the stuff that she lied about in her interview. Just say that all. And that was all concocted after Fotis on his own did this murder and they were getting together to figure out how to cover it up. If the jury can buy that, you just saved your client from being convicted of guilty for conspiracy to commit murder. Now, there's one big problem with this theory in my mind, and you can tell me if you see other problems with this theory. One big problem, I think, which really seals the deal with this theory, is that it doesn't seal the deal, but it really takes a big chunk out of this theory. And that is that why was Michelle answering his phone that morning? The morning when Fotis was actually committing this murder, killing Jennifer, he left his phone at home, and she answered the phone. Why is she answering his phone? There's a number of other phone calls that came in that she did not answer. And it's also clear that that his phone was being manipulated before, meaning seems like she was carrying around his phone, waiting for a phone call. Now, if she didn't know anything until after the fact, why is she answering the phone call? And this was a phone call that was set up by Fotis' friend. So what's going on with that? And that, my friends, I think really, as a lawyer's perspective, that really seals the deal that you can't argue anymore that it was just that she was involved with the cover-up. Now, you could try to explain that away in other ways. You can try to say the fact that, well, Michelle realized that Fotis left his phone at home, and sometimes couples answer the phones for each other, especially if it's someone who's calling who's a good friend, maybe a good friend of both of them, or even a good friend of her boyfriend, and she knows that he's going to be worried about where his friend is, why is he not answering the phone, and maybe that's why she answered the phone. But that really, I think, is the big problem with my whole theory. Why is she answering that phone? And number two, which really I think seals the deal on that, is that why didn't she include that in her alibi, and why did he include that in his alibi? So Fotis included that he was home and answered the phone at 8:30 when really she did, and she left that out of her alibi that she didn't say that she answered the phone. That really shows pretty strongly that they were conspiring together. Now, again, I'm not saying that you can't explain this at all. You can try, but my whole theory that this only happened after, and that's an argument that can be made to the jury, you're still going to be stuck with how you're going to answer the phone call. And it could be there's other pieces of evidence. If you think that I missed other pieces of evidence which point very clearly to the fact that she was involved with the conspiracy in the beginning of the trial and before the murder, and not just afterwards in an attempt to cover it up, let me know in the comments. But that's my take on this. I think that The attorneys did a good job again, and but I think as an attorney, and again, no jurors were interviewed in this case and gave their opinion about this, but I think that piece of evidence could have weighed very heavily on the jury about why is she answering that phone, and that really looks like it was all set up from the beginning, and that means that she was involved from the beginning. But again, everything together, I'm not saying that everything together doesn't equal that she was involved with the conspiracy from the beginning. All the circumstantial evidence together does point to the fact that she may have been involved in the beginning as well. Just the argument that I'm making, that I made in this video, and the theory that I brought forth, was just an argument to create perhaps reasonable doubt that she was actually involved with the murder, with the conspiracy to commit murder from the beginning. But like I said, the answering the phone call, I think, is really tough to get around, and this was not addressed by the defense attorney. I think he should have addressed it. He kind of glossed over it. If you look at the closing arguments, he didn't really address it. And I think that that's such an important part. He's got to come up with some sort of theory. Say that it's just a couple. They answered phone calls all the time together. Or she answered his phone all the time. Or different things. Just come up with some sort of reason why she answered that phone, to try to explain off that really it was not because she was involved with this, and also try to explain why she did not include that in her alibi and that he did include it in his alibi. All right. Well, that is my take on the Michelle Troconis verdict. The jury has spoken guilty. A lot of people are happy with that, and that's fine. It looks like there's a lot of evidence that points to that direction. Again, some people are arguing the other way. But if there's any more ideas or suggestions that you have, please leave it in the comments, and that will be it for now. Please, if you haven't yet, subscribe, like the video, and we will see you next time.